Hello, and welcome to the Pricing for the Planet podcast, the podcast that explores the intersection of business and sustainability. Today, it's a fascinating topic because we'll talk about true price. Michel, thank you so much for being here. You know the drill now, it's not your first time in this podcast. So, can you explain what would be the key message you would like the audience to remember from your podcast episode?
Thank you, Fabien. It's a real pleasure to sit in front of you today. The key takeaway that I would love people to remember is that there is no sustainable economy without true prices. And the true price is the market price plus the social and environmental costs. As long as it's cheaper to exploit and to pollute, we will not have an economy that works for sustainability.
Awesome. So, Michel, again, it's we know each other, but I think it will be great if you can introduce yourself and explain all the great things that you have done in this space.
Thank you. I will explain a bit of where I come from and what I do. So, when I was a teenager and I was still at high school, I was struck by poverty in the world and I wanted to help the poor. And what I did was saving lots of money. I actually was, together with my schoolmates, able to raise 16,500 euros for poor people in African countries. And we went to Ghana. In Ghana, there was a farmer community that was producing cocoa, amongst other things, that was eventually ending up in the stores in the Netherlands. And we helped them with sanitation projects. But after thinking through what I did, I felt a bit uneasy. First of all, I felt struck by the white man saviorism, that we somehow had to do something for people that weren't somehow able to help themselves. And secondly, I also noticed that the situation that many of these farmers were in was caused by a global trade system that more or less kept them poor. It was more expensive for them to export raw beans than to export the other way around. It was more expensive for them to export a chocolate bar than to export raw beans. So there was a tariff on exporting branded products. And in a way, there was this perverse incentive to just be relying on commodities that are hard to actually differentiate on, that is kind of sensitive to other countries, Ivory Coast, for example, or other farmers. You cannot really, distinguish yourselves. You cannot really add value on site at the farm. No, you are just relying on the export and the importers of in this case, the Netherlands. In Amsterdam, the largest cocoa harbor in the world, just 5-10 kilometers from where I'm sitting today. And there chocolate companies made billions of euros of profits. And I was so perverse. I felt like, seriously, we have a kind of a heritage that involves colonialism as well. And we have decennia or centuries of people that are in a way exploited in trade, and we still have that in a way. We still do not have the trade that is free from these forms of suffering, and at the same time we do these do-goodism, these NGOic projects that suddenly need to alleviate poverty. It just felt dirty. So when I went to university, instead of going into business and into economics, I went into sociology. I wanted to understand the fundamentals of the market. And that is where I kind of deconstructed that prices aren't a coincidental outcome of free markets with an invisible hand. No, far at the contrary, prices are the silent composers of our life, created through norms that are reproduced in structures such as education, such as culture, civic culture, the norms that we teach each other, but also through fiscal systems, the tariffs that I told you about, but also VAT. And there's more financial economic institutions, such as the accounting system, that, for example, does not incorporate the poverty costs on the balance sheet of corporations or the climate cost on the balance sheets of corporations. And well, I just noticed that we need to change this. And when I, really, the first year of my university, I felt kind of, if I really want to make the world better, I need to change how prices are defined. And that is kind of my life mission ever since. It's now 19 years ago that I went to Ghana for this setting up this NGO, the Need for the Needy grassroots organization in Accra. And I've come a long way with all the people I work with, but no way near yet to the finish line.
Perfect. And can you maybe explain a little bit more about, is it True Price Institute or True Pricing Institute?
No, it's a True Price Foundation. And we
Foundation.
also have another organization called Impact Institute. True Price, you have True Price and True Price Foundation. So it's kind of two organizations in one. And what the True Price does is, first of all, making the open access methodology to calculate true prices in the first place. And that's actually quite a, not an easy endeavor. It involves three steps. First of all, mapping the value change. That means differentiating the different ingredients or components of products, finding the origins as part of that step. So where does the product come from? Secondly, what is the social and environmental effects that occur? For example, underpayment, under-earning, exploitation of laborers, that is all potential effects. On the environmental side, extraction of water, soil, pollution of air, destruction of forests, all sorts of externalities. And finally, valuing that. So the third step is putting a price to those harmful effects to society. So we made an open source methodology for that. You can download, for example, the monetization coefficients that we use to make global average estimations of these different effects for basically a quick and dirty true price calculation back of the envelope. But we also have a foundational document, the norms and principles for true pricing, that basically trace down the logic, the methodological logic, into the human rights declarations. That fundamentally you always have, when you value and price things, there's always a normative foundation for that, as I have explained. And the one foundation that is missing in current day prices is human rights. We insufficiently incorporate the unalienable kind of characteristics that people and the planet has to kind of get or that needs to be respected and protected. And so, for example, a right to a living, a right to drinking water, to a house, these are all unalienable phenomena that you need to always respect and protect as a company, as a consumer, or as a state. And what we did is basically asking how, if you have that, what is needed to ensure that? What is the cost for remediation if you infringe upon that? So what is the cost for restoration, compensation, prevention, and retribution? And basically what you then get is the invoice for nature, or the invoice for the protection and respect of human rights.
Awesome. That's such an important concept. And I think it's a shame that, we don't talk much more about that than what we do today. I mean, yes, I see a lot of traction around this concept, but it's clearly not enough. So yes, you still have a lot of work to do, Michel.
Unfortunately, on the one hand, yes. On the other hand, luckily, you see a recent acceleration of the normative frameworks. For example, the climate agenda. That not many people know that actually the origins of the climate agenda lies in the human rights agenda. It was in 1948 that Eleanor Roosevelt embarked on the endeavor to set the standard of dignity. And in the consequential years, the Conference of Parties for Climate, the Conference of Parties for Biodiversity, and the ILO conventions and similar conventions were further refined and disseminated across the world. So it's more than 75 years ago that this journey was embarked upon by different world leaders. And nowadays, we see increasingly refinement of these norms in global governance conventions, such as the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015. And what is very interesting is that the European Commission has adopted the Green Deal, and that really requires different economies, different member states to respect and then also protect these rights. For example, the right to livability, for their inhabitant or the citizens. So in a way, it may seem like it's nature, climate, but in fact, it is actually ensuring livability for the human species in balance with nature. But that's just to illustrate. There's an increasing push from regulators, and true pricing is just a more granular and more refined information point if you kind of adopt the concept of human rights and the rights to a clean environment. It's basically asking, if you adopt that, and many people would agree, luckily, these are the implications for market players. This is then the cost to a value chain behind a product that still need to be incurred to address that this will be safeguarded.
Perfect. No, makes sense. And so to come back on true price, and again, we are at Pricing for the Planet. We are big fans of true price. Um, but sometimes people are asking, like, do you have, concrete examples of, how to make or to adopt true price in the real world?
Yeah. It's a very good point. We actually, for the first years of our existence as relatively young students doing this, as a kind of their mission, we weren't really taken serious. We went to the big four accounting firms with the belief that if they would only see our brilliant methodology to incorporate those externalities, the true price method, they would definitely fund it. They would just help us setting up our foundation and ensuring that the protocol for how to calculate the true price will be adopted by the thousands of companies. I mean, who would disagree, right? They are the guardians of what is considered value, so they would adopt it, right? And we were not correct. They pointed us to the door. They liked us, they liked our energy, but they thought we were crazy. They thought this will never be adopted. Why would companies make products more expensive? And in fact, we went to a retailer, and a retailer said, this is against competition law because you bring different parties together and determine prices. That is a form of a green cartel. And there was an American entrepreneur, and that entrepreneur said to us, this is communism. And when you say communism, well, you are game over in America. So it didn't really help. There was a professor as well, the most renowned professor in the field of food, who said, we tried this 20 years ago and it's not possible. Technically, it's not possible. So we really didn't get the momentum that we were hoping for until one day. One day, we had an email in our inbox from a small red chocolate bar in the Netherlands called Tony Chocolonely. And Tony Chocolonely said, we have the ambition to go towards slave-free chocolate, but we do not know how to calculate that. And maybe there's other things you want to map. And we said, definitely we can. So we did. We made the calculations of the true price of chocolate, and we noticed that there was a significant gap between the price that they charged and the true price. There was a gap that was almost equivalent to 1/3 of the bar price of their chocolate. And despite the fair trade certification and despite all their efforts, they still had a long way to go. They were actually 40% better than the conventional alternative bars of chocolate. So they were doing pretty well, but still a big gap. On the cocoa, think of the under earning of the farmers that are in cooperatives working, and that were the actual farmers that I saw when I was a teenager, suffering and working very hard. Think, for example, of the extraction of scarce water, the overusage of pesticides and herbicides and other chemicals, but also the pollution in the transport. But don't forget about the milk that is generated by cows that emit lots of methane that has, significant greenhouse gas potential, and that is also something we also accounted for, and ultimately we came up with the actual invoice for nature, invoice for human rights. We presented this to the CEO of Tony Chocolonely, Henk-Jan Beltman, and his COO, and we were actually pretty nervous because we didn't bring them a very nice message. Despite their good intentions, they weren't there yet, and we were nervous. We had to tell them that they had a significant gap. And in just 20 minutes, they decided to transfer 1.5 million euros to the procurement department to kind of absorb the price needed for the cocoa. So that was really an example, the first example for us that could actually lead to changing of business decisions. They also added additional premium to the fair trade premium that they were already paying, and they started a movement, the open chain movement, where they agreed what the kind of principles are that they need to stick to ensure that there will be better prices for the cocoa and that there's a more equitable and sustainable value chain, including longer term contracts, all sorts of field improvements, more sustainable agriculture, but also a living income price, a price that ensures that farmers get a better living. So these were, amongst others, the principles. And up to this date, they are using the methodologies to monitor their improvements and to structure their value chain and their products.
And I remember we had a discussion a couple of like months ago, and I think what strikes me was this concept of like price elasticity that is no longer working in the context of sustainability. Can you share a little bit about around that?
So, can you elaborate on what you mean with the price elasticity and
We talked about true price, and we were saying, by increasing the price, you
yeah,
will, kill the demand, which is definitely not what you've seen and experienced on the market.
good point. So, yeah, people were a bit hesitant, right? Increasing the prices. Because if you increase the price, and that is actually what we stand for, there will be a drop of demand. I mean, that is the whole idea. We accept that, we incorporate that, we actually strategically use that for more sustainable products, right? But that's true. In the case of Tony Chocolonely, the organization, the business increased their prices twice, but they announced to their consumers that they will use the extra income to compensate for the drop of the cocoa price. So they had a good story and they didn't lose out on their sales because their consumers knew that this was something they would buy into, literally. But in other cases, we've been working on this now for for hundreds of companies in hundreds of products as well. And for example, we introduced this in a supermarket in Amsterdam, and that was a neighborhood supermarket with 5,000 consumers and thousands of products. And they actually saw an increase of their sales of 5% after having introduced this in their vegetables, fruits, and their bread. And they're now rolling it out to the dry food, such as pastas and nuts. And so they actually see an increase of sales and not a drop. And that is a default true price. So they only charge the true price and they absorb a bit of their margin. And the consumers have already brought up 50,000 euros in a year for remediative actions in value chains, including regenerating the soil, cleaning the water, all sorts of interventions, also contributing to a living income for banana farmers. So that was a point in case where you don't see a complete drop and actually an increase. But these are two relatively, call it sustainably oriented brands, and also consumers know then that that is what they can expect. We've also brought it into the stores of the 40% market share holding retailer Albert Heijn, part of Ahold has. And they actually experimented with this for 2 months for their coffee, the to-go coffee. And what's really interesting, there was a mandatory choice. So consumers had to choose between paying or not paying the true price. So they had to choose. They couldn't not choose. And what we saw is after the introduction, there was a 20% conversion towards true pricing, and that dropped to 15%. Surveys showed that 1/3 of the consumers were willing, and actually the actual revealed paying behavior was only 20 to 15%, so half of it. That is consistent with behavioral economic research that we've done in this subject. We see a small group, or kind of a minority of people, that are actually paying for a true price, regardless of certain criteria. They would just do it because they feel it's a nice opportunity, it's something novel, it's something good. There's obviously a group that isn't willing, and that wants to know they want to know more information on traceability, effectiveness, transparency. And there's also just skeptics. There's even people who wouldn't agree with the need for addressing these social environmental costs. You have a lot of variations in the consumer preferences. One of the most striking things that we observed in our experiments is that there's a 95% conversion if the true price is the default price. So if it's actually the norm to pay a true price, the vast majority of people actually converts them into kind of a true price payer. Now, the logic of this is obviously that people are norm sensitive. Evolutionarily, you can speak of a strong kind of evolutionary push or a fitness premium on norm sensitivity, right? It kind of is the group intelligence that norms represent. You, by definition, if you follow the norm of others, by the definition that that person is alive, it seems to be a pretty good default choice. So people are there's a strong fitness push in evolution on being norm sensitive. It's probably one of the more strong social phenomenon, norm sensitivity. So it's no wonder that if you set the true price to be the norm, that people then convert, and vice versa. If you make the retail price the norm, what is actually the norm everywhere, then obviously you won't get much conversion to more sustainable choices. It's all about norm design. And that is what we've learned. And that is also what we are pushing for, that we make the true price the norm, that we ingrain that into our education systems and into kind of purchase systems. After the Albert Heijn experiment, we also saw an experiment in Germany where 2,150 stores introduced true prices for 3 weeks for a variety of dairy and meat products. And again, you saw very interesting patterns, a drop of the sales in meat. Actually, that supermarket was a bit disappointed, but we were actually, fully aware that that would happen. There was a move because meat isn't the most sustainable product, and there was quite a large additional cost for that. There was a move towards more sustainable plant-based meat options. The drop of organic meat was less proportionally to the drop of the conventional meat. So you saw a drop there, but it was smaller also because the true price gap there was also relatively smaller. These are all the typical things that you would expect after introducing true pricing. So the thing that I think could have been improved there is providing sufficient alternatives, ensuring that if people go for true pricing, or if they're confronted with that there's an alternative that's actually cheaper, that is more sustainable. Because true pricing is ultimately about acting, putting the act in impact, ensuring that you actually go for those products that have the lowest impact on society.
Awesome. I love that. Just to make sure that we will have enough time to talk about it, because love the concept. Can you explain where to start? I think I'm sure a lot of people will say, that's awesome, I want to start, but they will feel kind of lost.
Yeah, as a producer, like on the producer side, or on the consumer side, or both?
Both, I guess.
Yeah. Let's take, you're an entrepreneur, you have a nice product, and you want to bring the true price of that value chain into into an overview. You first start with mapping the different steps in the value chain. Then you kind of make a estimation of what are the biggest social environmental costs. And then finally, you put monetization coefficients. Well, for the first two steps, obviously, you need to have some understanding of your products. You need to work with your suppliers. You need to ask a few people. It can already be in a conversation, just having a few phone calls, just having a workshop together, mapping it. Then in mapping the effects on society, there's LCA experts, there's subject matter experts, what is paid, what is insufficient, what is the need for a living wage. There's lots of open source databases for that. For example, there's this living wage indicator foundation. There's on the natural side, there's lots and lots of open source carbon LCA databases, for example. Just Google on it and you'll find lots of sources already prepared for products. It's kind of general sector averages, global averages. And finally, you can use the proxies from the True Price database. We've published the monetization coefficient for the different indicators, and you can just make the calculations and it will all add up. So this is just a first rough and dirty true price that you can then take and refine and specify and make more granular on the go and make more specific to your value chain. but we really believe you can just get your hands dirty and run with it. And on the side of the consumer, you can do the same thing. It may be a bit tedious to do that for all the products you buy, but kind of be aware that you need to ask your favorite brands to ensure that they work towards a true price. Ask the question, go for it. And also, if that's possible, ask them to, for example, ensure that the carbon price, the price to climate, is kind of addressed. I mean, that is something that's almost a no-brainer. It's very low-hanging fruit. And then work towards a living income, a living wage, but just ask your brands to incorporate that, because it starts always with the question from a consumer, and then there's action.
Perfect. That's really fascinating. Honestly, I think we need to make sure that this topic is everywhere in university, in college, because that's such a transformative concept. Michel,
One more
maybe
thing,
any.
because before I end,
Oh, go
actually,
ahead.
there's news for you then, because we actually have in 2027 in the Netherlands the Ministry of Education that has adopted in the protocol for business and economics for high schools true pricing as a mandatory subject, and that is really a real big milestone. For the first time, to my knowledge, actually in the world and in history, true pricing is part of the exams for high school students. And that is how we transform norms. So it will be the new normal for hundreds of thousands of students in the Netherlands. And hopefully other countries can learn from this, other subjects can learn from this. Also, the kind of higher educations, business schools, applied universities, applied science universities, all sorts of academic and non-academic institutions, education institutions can adopt true pricing and make it the new normal, so that entrepreneurs, consumers, professionals of the future just have this in their natural system, and the, call it, balance between supply and demand in price markets will naturally incorporate the true price instead of the exploitative faulty prices that we see today.
Well, congrats. That's indeed a huge milestone. Wow.
Thank you.
Good job. Michel, a huge thank you. It was super clear. Again, what is the website where people can go to dig further?
Trueprice.org.
Perfect. And again, for the audience, go follow Michel on LinkedIn. I will add the link in the comment section. And Michel, a huge thank you for sharing all of those great, insights from your everyday work, and, keep up the good work.
Thank you so much, Fabien, and likewise, keep pushing.